Hello, hello. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you could hear me early. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, could we start with a small self introduction and like maybe go through like what what you kind of do and what kind of inspires you, and then that usually kicks off the questions.
Okay, sure. I guess probably a good place to start would be I'll just pull up my Instagram really quickly. So it lets me load it up on here. Yeah, so my background is primarily as a software engineer. So I've been a front end developer for about 10 years. I learned by making music, what's the word? Like music visualizers. So I'd use stuff like web audio and what's it called? 3.js and a bunch of other different libraries to kind of visualize audio. And over the years, I've been able to experiment with different projects such as like Touch Designer. Oop, let me log into this really quickly so I can get a video up for you. I think I'll just go in a new window here. Oop. Cool. So some of the stuff that I do, I build like this kind of video works, which are all like made within Touch Designer. So it's basically I want to say a wraparound for like shaders. So if you're familiar with shaders, it's written in WebGL. So Touch Designer basically gives you like these nodes, and you can interact with shaders through that. So that's like how I've been working primarily within the generative sector. But then more recently, with like Nth Culture and other JavaScript projects, I've been mainly working with code, which is kind of like a different approach, but equally as fun. So Celine, could I share about the process? Okay, are you talking about Nth Culture? Okay, sure. I can pull up the project actually fairly quick. Let me just give me a second. So okay, so this is like the introductory, like the first iteration of this project. Let me just get this loaded up. All right. Cool. Oh, sorry, wrong branch. Window. Okay, we'll go with. Oh, cool. Okay. Gotcha. Cool. If I bring this back to, let's say, the wax preview. Okay, cool. So all of my projects basically start with a grid. If I can find one that's a bit easier to see. Okay. Is this easy to view on your end? Let me know if it's not. I'll actually make it a bit. Bigger. Cool. And we'll just reduce. Yeah. Okay. What's that? Right. So all of my projects basically are based around a grid, right? And then what I do is I'll then within each grid. So if you can see on my screen here, there's like there's a fork. So I've got a grid class. I can run into that really quickly. And basically, this grid class takes in a width of what the grid would be, the height and the amount of blocks I want horizontally and vertically, and then the margin and whether it's cascading or not. and that's like whether the bricks are have different heights or different widths, right? So then that creates an array, which then spits out in a for loop. And I go through those in a for loop, and then that's how I'm able to then create this. So in this particular instance, I've actually nested it. So if I just disable that, for instance, so that's like the base grid there, and I can go in and then subdivide it further with more grids in that. So to create something like to create something like this, the principle is very much the same. All I then do is I have a style. So if I just close that, there we go. I think I might have killed it a bit. Bear with. Let me just reduce the. Yeah. I'll take this down a notch. Yeah, we've absolutely killed it. So I'll take this down a notch. Okay, cool. So this is like a work in progress. So it doesn't look as it should, but I'll give you the gist of it. So for each one of those blocks, so if I just disable this quickly, cool. So for each one of those blocks, it'll call an instance of a new class. And how I define them, I create like separate blocks. In a final long form project, I create an array and stuff like that. All the patterns that goes in each block will be decided randomly via data from on chain. So I'll have like let's say for instance I've got pillow here. Let's open that. By the way, slow me down if I'm going too fast because I do tend to kind of ramble on as well. Okay. Close this. Right. So if I get these side by side. Yeah, for each one of these blocks, it'll call a new instance of pillow, and then it'll then show that style. Now, passing the draw scale, that just helps with sizing the motifs depending on like the screen size and width. It just keeps everything nice and tidy. Yeah, so within this, I mean, this one's a bit more complicated than something else I'd create, but all it is I just run different, well, in this instance, I'm using a bit of maths to like create different shapes. It's trigonometry mainly. I'm not that great at maths, so this is a bit of a mess. I need to go back in and like fix it. But the concept here is I try to like separate my concerns within development. So the grid is one thing. All that grid class does for me, it just gives me the size, the width, and like the position of like where that block will be on the page. And then I pass that information into my design, and then I do whatever I need to do within there. So I've actually got an abstraction of a block element, which takes in the width, the height, and then the traits. The traits is something that's like could be like the color palette, whether it's noisy, whether it's dashed, or a bunch of other features. So yeah, that's like the very basis of my like, workflow, and kind of how I was able to go on and go ahead and build Env Culture. So if I like reload this, for instance, you'll slowly see, how each pattern feeds into the boxes. So actually, yeah, a previous collection I did for proof. I'll share the link in the comments now. So this was like fairly light in terms of like shader work, but I used shaders to give like a painted texture feel on the final output. So how I did that was similar to this, I've got like my blocks and I've got like different patterns and such. I'll then get the texture file from the final image and then pass that into a shader and literally shift the pixels by 1 or 2 in a random direction. That way you get like a bit of a jaggedy edge. Let me just try and actually load that project up to give you an idea of how that works. But meanwhile, you can actually look at the link that I've just pasted in the chat. I think that would have been. Hold on, let me just get GitHub open. Gosh, I should have had this. Where is it? I think it might be this one. Wait, I think it might be this one actually. AB token. Okay. Cool. Actually, yeah. Bear with me. I'll try and track down that file because it's a pretty big project. So I'm trying to. A bit annoying that I don't have it handy right now. But yeah. And then. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, that's correct, Jenna. Let me just honestly, this is annoying that I don't have it accessible to me right now. Where would I have put it? Yeah, so I think if you can like learn how to use shaders, you can do some really cool stuff. So there's artists like MP Cos, for instance, and William Mapan. Like they do some incredible work with shaders. But for me personally, I kind of I don't know. I like the approach that how I'm working right now, like a very much object oriented approach. It gives me a bit more freedom, and it's not as what's the word? It's not as intense as well. It's a bit more fun this way. But I think if I one day I'd like to write shader first. But yeah, let me just load this up really quickly. Okay, got it. Awesome. Okay, cool. So this is essentially what that project would look like. Origin. Alright. I think I should be able to run this. I love their work. I love their work and sorry for the continuous questions. Sorry, whose work are you talking about? think about this one. Oh, Jesus. Right. Okay. Right. So here we go. So I've got it open up now. Let me just run this. Okay, so run start. So as far as I'm aware, with MP-Cos, he uses 3.js, and then he manipulates the elements using shaders. So as like some sort of like a post render. With Mapan, he has like a custom project library that he interacts with WebGL with. Oh, this. Okay, cool. We're running. We are up. Right. Let me just alter this grid size a little bit so we can view it properly. Where did I put the sizing again? So this is typically what like a final project would look like. There's a lot going on. So for some projects, I'll have like an idea where I'll think, okay, I want to try something with like spirals or like squares, but most of my projects, I'll literally just start writing. And I think especially with this grid-based approach, when I'm creating like the individual blocks, I kind of just freestyle it. And then I kind of discover like, different loops and different patterns. So actually I've got a folder of some experiments that I've been doing recently. I think if I go to new concepts, for instance. So, okay. So yeah, so these are, I guess, so you can say like some freestyles that I've done with that grid pattern. And what I just kind of like just lay out a simple color palette, and I'm able to just keep on tweaking until something fun comes out. Sometimes it gets really good, sometimes it gets really bad, but I guess that's part of the process. So this would have been probably one session where I just kept on tweaking and tweaking until I got, more and more experimental. And then also, depending on like your coding ability, like if you're not the strongest of coders, I highly recommend like this approach, just because once you have the grid laid out and that does what it needs to do, you can then experiment and like learn so much about what your code is actually doing. So when it comes to the color palettes, I tend to use sites like I think it's Coolers. Yeah, I tend to use sites like Coolers. They have like generally some pretty nice color palettes in here. And then you can also, if you go to their tools, so if you've got like an image that you want to use, it'll let you like upload an image. So if I was to like put that in there, and then it'll build a palette out of that. So yeah, I don't really have a go-to palette selection. I just tend to just go with the flow, and also depending on what the output is starting to look like, the colors kind of affect that as well. So if I've picked like a random palette, I'll keep on working until that color works with that design. Does that make sense? Encoding related to 3D XR design would touch design would be the best way to start learning. So I think Okay, so I've actually got a project in Touch Designer which is 3D that I can show you. Let's have a look. I'm not the strongest like 3D person, but I do find it very, very easy to get into 3D using Touch Designer. So let me just load this project up. Okay. So in here, I have, where is it? I have an FBX, which is just an FBX of Kevin. And with that, I've been able to like connect a lot of different nodes and create a scene essentially. And if I go to like say for instance my camera, my geometry, all right. So let me play with this. I can move around. Yeah. So yeah, Touch Designer helps. I mean, it helps me anyway. Play with 3D a lot easier. And then you see like the little glitch effects that I've got going on top. Let me just undo this really quickly. Come on. There we go. So that little glitch effects that I've got on top, all that is, it's just a container, and then I've written a shader for that in there, and then that's all it does. So I think depending on how you think things through, Touch Designer is a pretty good way because you can separate your concerns, right? So in here, all this box cares about is the bloom, and if I don't want the bloom anymore, I can just bypass that and go straight to that, and boom, I just have my glitch. Yeah. So yeah, this is like, I mean, it's a bit more complex than anything else, but yeah. So let me see. Oh yeah, and in here, I don't know. It depends how you feel about like working and how much you want to actually put in. But I feel if you want to do like a quick brainstorm of an idea, Touch Designer is really good for that, right? But if you want to get like down to the nitty gritty, like the proper detail, then I guess you probably should use something like a Blender or any other 3D program of your choice. But I really enjoy Touch Designer from that aspect. And what makes this even better is, if I wanted to add any sort of interaction, it wouldn't be too hard. So let's say, for instance, if I had a MIDI device, actually, do I have one nearby? If I wanted to add like any sort of MIDI control, I'll do that really quickly. I'll show you. I could just go in here, just put MIDI in. Let me plug in. I'll plug in this little MIDI device down here. I think I should be able to go dialogue. Okay, APC. Cool. Okay, cool. So I've got, there you go. I've really got one slider input there. So if I wanted to say, for instance, change the camera position, so that's currently 10. So if I go down, if I do something like this, right? So let's leave it at 10. Okay. That's my math. So I just need to go in here, get my math, push that in there. Now the range of this MIDI signal goes from 0 to 127. So all I'd have to go, I'd go into my range and change my range from 127, so 0 to 127, and then set my range to, let's say 8 to 12, right? And then in my camera, just grab that, drag and drop it. Like, this is very rough. Obviously, you wouldn't do this in real life, but yeah. So there you go. So that's why I love like Touch Designer in that regard. You can, make very quick prototypes, so on and so forth. Thank you, Celine. Ooh, gosh. But you know, the thing is, like, touch design is really fun. You know, it's I don't know, it looks scary right now, but you know, once you figure out the basics, you know, you can make some really impressive stuff. I mean, actually, the first like generative collection I ever made was actually in Touch Designer. I can actually show you that. So we're talking probably 2020 right now. So that would have been, actually no, 2021. Okay, I'll be this boy. I can quit that. Okay, so yeah, so this is another option that you could potentially have if you wanted to make generative art, but you don't want to code, right? So this is, yeah, actually, this was like my first like generative collection per se. And instead of like using a seed or like, you know, any kind of input, I'm actually using the timeline and using the frame rate. So you can kind of see in here. So let me pull up, actually, yeah, let me show you the object collection. I'll show you right now, Wage. So this is like one of my first collections. Yeah. So Litmus, for instance, right? So this is Litmus 2466, right? In Touch Designer, that will be frame 2466. So let me just open this up and type in frame 2466. Boom. See, that's the same thing. So all I would do in that instance is I would just save that file out and then mint it. And that's what I did. Does that answer your question, Wage? Yeah. I just used the frames. And you know, yeah, honestly, it's like, it sounds so dumb, but I think it's actually pretty genius because um, the amount of frames here, I've set this to 6,000. So this is before I understood like truly what long form generative art meant. So I just thought, you know what, I'm going to have 6,000 of these. Yeah, after a while it loops itself. So realistically, unless you had like a really expressive algorithm, I'd probably, if I did something like, you know, like 60 maybe. So my range would be from 1 to 60. So I'd literally only have like 60 outputs. Yeah. So I think it's a pretty interesting thing to work with. And yeah. So 608. Is there any other questions?
Sorry, I hope you don't mind me cutting.
Yeah, sure.
That's a lot of feedback. Give me a second. But yeah, I think our cohort isn't all very familiar with coding or generative art. Not
Okay.
everyone has a background with that. A lot of people here actually have a background with traditional fashion.
Right.
Um, Could you give us the example of, or have you worked with fashion with your code as well? And could you give an example as to how that might be able to be applied with maybe like traditional fashion as well?
So I'm kind of like not so much into the fashion world, but I can try to explain like I guess my concepts. So what we're writing is code. The best way you can kind of work from a generative perspective and bring it into fashion would be sewing machines. So a lot of the projects that I use, they can be converted into SVGs. So those SVGs can then be, used to, create embroideries, stitching, so on and so forth. But yeah, outside of that, I don't have too much of like a crossover. But that's stuff I'm actually currently trying to learn more about. Yeah. And with regards to, have I used anything other than grids recently? No, actually, I've really been locked into like playing with the grids, mainly because let me just show you why I kind of like this process so far. So I can make something as like crazy as this, and I can make something as uniform as this. So it gives me so much more freedom, and it opens me up to so many different ideas that I wouldn't see otherwise. And also kind of thinking of like the fashion side of things, I feel like if I wanted to create like let's say for instance like some sort of mesh or like an embroidery, symmetry is like a big thing. And yeah, it just helps create that make that process a bit easier for me. Oh yeah, so wage. Yeah, I've actually done some plotter work previously from generative code, but I'll check that out. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Let me just go back up to a question. Jessica, so in relation to like my aesthetic, I started off primarily doing, like I said, music visualizers. So if I go back to this actually goes back to Touch Designer once more. So I was playing around with where is it? I think it might have been some sort of probably would have been something like this actually. Let's load this up. I'm not sure if this will play out. Let's just not do anything. Yeah, so I was working with playing with like visualizing audio in this manner. Then I just started like playing with color ramps. So just creating a basic gradient, and then soon enough you get interesting color shades, and it's just I don't know. This is kind of where I developed my aesthetic, you could say. Just vibes. There's no like real thought process. But yeah, mainly like playing with gradients, experimenting with like shapes and forms, and a lot of tweaking, a lot of tweaking. And I can literally hours, just sat here, just seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work. Oh, that was nice. Oh, yeah, that's cool. Let's get a bit more blur in there. Awesome. Ooh, we're talking. You know what? Blur it some more. Huh. But yeah, that's the vibe. What interests or inspires you most at the moment in the field of programming? So with the AI stuff, actually, there's quite hold on. There's where is she? Mean Arturia, right? So Mean Arturia is probably one of the best like AI people at the moment, she creates like neural networks that render images like this, which I find incredibly insane. And I think this is Mid-Journey. So I'm interested in people that have like really interesting concepts. But other than that, I don't really have many other like I don't know what's the word, current interests. I'm very much stuck with my music visualization and kind of trying to create patterns and a lot of experimentation. I tend to find that like if I focus too much on particular trends or whatever, I get lost in the source and I never find a happy medium. So just kind of typing stuff in until it looks pretty tends to be the best way for me. AI has a little bit of that to it. So there's a project that I posted quite recently, which is half half generative and half AI. So I started off, so like I was showing you before, this is once again using that grid algorithm that I showed you earlier. I created like these little patterns, kind of experimented with those. I liked these three. And then I had like a little idea. I was like, okay, so I can put them through, I think it was ControlNet. Yeah, ControlNet using the Dutch wax prompt. And it gave me like these three patterns. And that kind of like started to kind of open my eyes a bit more to what I could possibly do with the AI stuff. So I don't know if I'm going to push this project into like an AI project or use AI to influence like color palettes, or further develop the patterns themselves. But even in that process, I was then able to kind of come across like these traditional African garments, right? And to see these kind of geometric shapes, it really inspired me as well because I was working on an algorithm which delivered like a similar, design, and it just so happens that the colors also match. So that was pretty cool. So yeah, I'm very much just kind of experimenting and like backtracing and finding like where I can meet real with experiments and blah 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 blah. Do you use any particular algorithms for your patterns, or do you have a sketch in your head? Honestly, it varies. I think a lot of the time it's just kind of vibes. I know that's not very detailed, but I start writing stuff and just kind of flow with it, and that's the best way that I've found myself to be successful. Anybody else? Actually, let me try and see if there's any kind of like projects that I might have on. I mean, is there a general interest so far in like touch designer, or are people more interested in like the code side of things? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, if you're interested in touch designer, I have a project link that I'll share in the chat right now. It's Gumroad. Yeah. So this is a touch designer project that I created. You can just, so all it is just like a sample audio visualizer. I've created it for anyone that's interested in visualizing audio and at least how to get started from I guess an MP3 file or your voice to a visual thing on screen. So by all means, have a play with that. Yeah. Yeah, I think if you don't have like, too much of a strong background on code, Touch Designer might be the best thing. I mean, I can just show you how quick it is to prototype a project, right? So if I wanted to create like a quick pattern, I could do noise. I could use something like noise. Set the size to like, I don't know, 1024. And then here, play with these parameters. All right. Then I can then use a ramp. Do something like this. With the colors, push them out a bit more. Tweak that. Ooh, that's a bit nasty. That I want that. I don't push all. Okay, push it a bit more blue. I think that's nice, and a hint of yellowish here. Yeah, cool. So I wanted to create something with that. I could use like a lookup channel here. Oops, sorry. Disconnect. Have my null out. Boom. Boom. So very quickly you can prototype ideas and build interesting patterns. So if I wanted to come back in here, play with the period on that, exponent, and there's like different noise types. So I'll forget that out of the way. Go back into my ramp. So yeah, it's very quick to like prototype. What would be the best way to like shift from node-based programming to learn code? That's a fun question. So the way that I like to think of node-based is that like each one of these boxes has a separate concern, right? So if I have, say for instance, if I show you like, I mean, this is probably like a bit more complicated than what I'm trying to explain, but let me just go to my index. Okay, you know what? Let me just create a new file. So, right. So in here, for instance, you have a noise function, you have the ramp, you have the lookup, and you have the null. So how I would think about it from perspective, and this is not like an exact example, but just a way for you to try to rationalize it. First thing you'd need a function of sort, right, that generated noise, and that could probably take an input, right? So let's just do an input. So you do something in here with that input. Let me just make that a bit bigger so you can see it. You do something with that input, and then can't type today. Then you'd return either an array or a number or whatever you want, right? So that would be that, and then the ramp could be another factor. So you could have like, say for instance, if you're using P5, you'd have a draw function, right? And that draw function is where your drawing comes out. So you could say for instance, what's going on here? Come on. Where the hell? Awesome. Right. So you could say, for instance, your ramp function would be your color array, and that would be. I'm just going to duplicate this really quickly. and that could take a value, right, based on a number, right? So let's just put like A and B. A dash. Oh, sorry. Look up, my bad. Look up. All right. So I'll take A and B, and then that'll return. Let's just say, leave it X, for instance, right? So you could have let n equals noise, and then have some random digit go into that. And then you'd have lookup, would then take n for the noise, and then the second thing could be like an array of colors, so on and so forth. So that's like one way you could go about it. But yeah, that was a very messy example, but I hope that makes sense. Oh, and there's also what's the word? Just remembered. There's also people like Daniel Schiffman. There's like really good coding train. Yeah, the coding train. So he has like really cool tutorials that you might find useful. And yeah, so I just dropped that in the chat as well. Yeah, he literally is the Bob Ross of generative art. Yeah. Last minute or so. Is any further questions?
While people are typing, I'd just like to come up and say thank you very much, Junior, for coming to our AMA and sharing your knowledge with us. Very sorry for the technical difficulties I had earlier in the session.
Okay.
I'm glad I was able to get them resolved.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I hope I made some sort of sense and I've showed you something. My DMs are open on Instagram, Twitter, or whichever. I think probably Discord as well. I need to check my privacy settings. But if you have any questions with regards to like a specific thing, by all means, drop me a message, and I'm more than happy to explain it the best I can to you. Obviously, this was like more of a sweeping definition, but sweeping explanation. But yeah.
For sure. I will send forward your the details that you submitted to the form into the 7th cohort chat later and tag you as well in case there's anything to change.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys. Honestly, it's all about the vibes. Like, it's just, yeah, you gotta keep it fun, keep it interesting. You're very welcome.
Well, it looks like we don't have any more questions, and we should be able to end the session about now. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Junior, for being here and answering our questions. And yeah, and thank you very much for being open to people's DMs and such.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Best of luck with everyone's work and come out with.
Thank you. Have a great night, everyone, or day.
Right.